Once again, it's a great honor and a privilege to be back in my homeland of Korea, and especially to be among such august members of the global community as well as leaders of business here in Korea. I hope that through this forum, it is impressed upon the leadership in South Korea that basically the calculus has changed. The status quo that had been the reality of this peninsula is no longer something that we can rely on in terms of how we look to the future and how this nation must move. Instead of focusing on opinion, let's talk about fact. The nuclear program in the North has made it such that now it is an existential threat to the United States. And the United States no longer looks at the peninsula as an ancillary or tertiary element in their foreign policy, but as the primary focus of their national foreign policy. As a student of history, and especially someone who studied American history in relation to its foreign policy in Asia as well as especially here in Korea, this is a fundamental shift. As we know, the international attention that is garnering is something that is in the press, not only in the United States, but here in Korea on a daily level. This is something that we here in South Korea needs to understand clearly, that the world has changed and that the calculus in terms of how we engage the North has also changed. Basically, there's two options as the interests of the United States move towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And Kim Jong-un basically pursues in an unrelenting way the nuclear capability to be able to be a threat to the United States and to the rest of the world. I can only foresee two options in this scenario. Either North Korea stops their nuclear program on their own, which most likely they will not do, or there's a confrontation on this peninsula. Yet there is a third way, and that third way is the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. But in order for peaceful unification to happen on the Korean Peninsula, it means that South Korea needs to lead. It has to have clarity in terms of its purpose at this crucial juncture in the history of the Korean people. We cannot be complacent. I believe that in one sense, the fact that we had to deal with 70 years of potential conflict has numbed us to the current realities that the Korean people face today. Just several months ago, when I was having meetings with key leaders within the Korean government, their assumptions were business as usual. There is no way a potential conflict can happen on the Korean Peninsula. There are even some that think here in Korea that the status quo is the way to go. And this is where I really want to challenge the key leaders in the business community here in South Korea, especially those who think in that way. They're not factoring in this new calculus due to the existential threat that North Korea poses, not only to the United States, but to every single one of its allies, and most importantly, to the free world. So I'm glad that my dear friend, Dr. Parker, you came here and basically scared the crap out of everybody in this room. I'm glad you did that. Because many of the leaders in South Korea, and especially in the business community, is not factoring in, which they should be doing, is not factoring in the potential of a conflict on the Korean Peninsula and what the implications will be to South Korea. So one thing that we as Koreans, and especially the South Korean leadership, needs to understand is that we no longer have the option to be complacent. That we are at a unique moment in time that can determine the fate not only of the Korean people, but the entire world. There's two paths. Either there's peaceful unification, or there's a potential conflict. This is one of the reasons why this is the moment in which the collective of the Korean people, not only here in the South, but in the diaspora, and then eventually in the North, should be championing the idea of the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. If we do that, then the global community, I am certain, will galvanize around that collective dream to build one unified nation along the lines of our ancestral philosophy and ideology of Hong-Igan, which is to build an ideal nation to serve all mankind. Now, how is this going to be? Now, how is this going to be? And I know that there's a lot of talk, especially within the academic circles, that the cost of reunification will be great, and therefore it will affect the living standards of the average Korean person. I completely disagree. Yes, there will be a short-term cost, but it's like any great endeavor. There is an initial cost in terms of investment, but the returns down the road are well worth those initial costs. JP Morgan did a study where they forecasted that a united Korea will be the 7th largest economy in the world. I think it will be even better than that. So instead of talking about opinion, let's talk about facts. So especially for many of you business leaders gathered in this forum, let me give you some facts that we need to consider when we think about our businesses in South Korea. Top 10 chaebols of Korean society controls 7% of its GDP. This is a mass collection of wealth in the hands of very few. You have an employment rate or unemployment rate of about 10% of those in the age group between 20 to 30. And yet, the Korean worker is the best educated workforce in the world. Young people today have difficulty. Highly well-educated, college-educated students or workers have a hard time even getting a job, even a menial job that traditionally is undertaken by those without high levels of education. So there is a saying called Hell Chosan for this demographic group, that they see no opportunity for them as they go forward. And how to participate in the South Korean economy, they don't have a clue. They don't have options. These are fundamental indicators of the fundamental inadequacies within the South Korean economy. The South Korean economy does not reflect a free market economic system. It reflects crony capitalism, going all the way back to the authoritarian military dictatorship, where they chose winners and losers. In the West, especially in America, we call that crony capitalism. And a lot of that is due to the structures within the Korean economy that favors those chaebols at the expense of everyone else. I believe that there's a tremendous opportunity, given this situation that we're facing today, to also marry that to the true potential that exists within the Korean economy, which is the Korean people. The South Korean economy going forward is going to face tremendous challenges because we do not have the workforce to support our industries and our markets. As we become more industrialized, the mineral resources and resources of the North will become an essential ingredient for injecting economic growth within the South Korean economy. Most importantly, the 25 million population of North Korea will be the source of South Korean domestic market and labor force. So the only way forward for the Korean people is unification. If unification can happen, not only will the South Korean economy have all the necessary ingredients to fuel the continuous growth engine that it is, but more importantly, it will get rid of, on the Korean Peninsula, the threat not only for the Korean people, but for the rest of the world because of the North's nuclear program. Most importantly, it will give the opportunity for the Korean people to bring an end to this cruel chapter of division within our long history, and to be whole once again, fulfill our national destiny, to build a model nation that can serve all humanity. But if that is to happen, unification has to be owned by every single Korean, not only here in South Korea, but in the diaspora and in North Korea. Throughout 2018 up until 2019, The Global Peace Foundation, in partnership with AKU, is going to launch the 1K Global Campaign. Based upon the vision outlined in my book, The Korean Dream, it will promote the idea of unification around the world. We will frame the Korean issue as the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Just as Mahatma Gandhi's effort for nationalism in India basically inspired all other nationalist movements after the end of World War II. Just like Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement inspired all other nations to deal with racial equality. Just like Nelson Mandela's effort to end apartheid in South Africa basically inspired the world to recognize the injustices of that separatist ideology based on race. The unification agenda will be not only the agenda for the Korean people, but for the entire world. That this is the civil rights issue of the 21st century, and this should become the dream not only of every Korean, but every global citizen. I want to invite all of you to participate in this and spread the Korean dream to the rest of the world. Thank you very much.